you have been making the rounds in the press. I've seen you. I've seen lots of clips talking about this new research paper that you were part of that got released. What do we call it? This research paper. What exactly are you? Because it's got a long name, right? So it's how are you bringing it down?
Yeah, and it kind of needed to, just because of what we're talking about. For the most part, it's about the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis, model, theory, whatever you want to call it. But it extends beyond that. It takes that as its starting point, with largely the idea that there could be an advanced civilization sequestering itself here on Earth, in the oceans, underground, in mountains, or on the far side of the moon, which is very much a possibility. And mostly going into why that is, how we might need to consider other ideas beyond the extraterrestrial model, and also how we might explain the constant sightings in and around this planet, in our atmosphere, underwater, but also with the relative quietness of space. NASA said openly there's not some interstellar highway. Space is unusually quiet. So how do we circle that square? How do we maybe consider this phenomenon, the UAP phenomenon, in the context of what we see, what we observe, and how there doesn't seem to be a lot of traveling interstellar between here and wherever else they may be coming from.
Wow. Great elevator summarization there, man. That was perfect.
I've been doing a lot of those lately.
Yeah,
for the last
you did
5
great.
years, really. Just what's the elevator pitch on the extraterrestrial model? Well, let me tell you.
Boom, got
So
it.
yeah, no, it's good to be able to have those, especially in, I've been doing a lot of interviews over the last week that are 4 or 5 minutes long, some 7, 8 minutes on the radio, and it's good to be able to make it succinct, give the idea. I prefer these long form interviews because you can really get into the weeds of it, but
which we are going to do for sure. No, I'm with you. Yeah, because that's way better than how I explained it to people. Like, they said they're walking among us. Like, that's how I explain the paper to
yeah,
people.
that could be a component of it too, and that's sort of the clickbait that's been getting all the attention. You put Harvard Cryptoterrestrial and walking amongst us in the same headline, and it's bound to go viral. And
I'm probably going to do it myself. I don't know.
You should.
Who knows?
As well,
I don't
ride
know.
that wave.
Yeah, I don't know. Who knows how this is gonna how that's gonna look. But yeah, that's what's exciting about it, to be honest with you. But any sort of hook to get you in is fine, in my opinion, is fine. Once you're in, you see, this is what this is about. Because as I went through the paper, I was fascinated actually what it said, rather than what I was hearing. Right? Oh, okay. Once you dove in, it was actually quite insightful and thoughtful. But before we dive in real quick, I do want to tell people, like, what is your background? Like, you're a professor in what?
Right. Yeah, that's a good starting point. I'm a professor of biological anthropology. I teach. I was fortunate enough to go to a university, Ohio State University, where we were required to learn about and teach the 4 fields. So in anthropology, there's cultural, biological, linguistic, and archaeology. And within each of those, you have specializations. So for instance, as a biological anthropologist, I'm primarily a paleoanthropologist. I do human variation, especially in our craniofacial architecture, comparative anatomy, things like that. But I also do archaeological field schools. I've done archaeology at a 3.5 million year old site in South Africa, an Australopithecus africanus site, 175,000-year-old Neanderthal site in southern France. I've led field schools all around Montana, and done them in Ohio as well. So we're sort of trained to be broad because humans are very complicated animals. So we learn about, teach about, and convey information about humans as a holistic entity. We are the more advanced, the more complex organisms on this planet. So it takes a lot to be able to really study us in our different forms. So yeah, I teach at Montana Technological University in Butte, Montana. It's one of the top science and engineering schools in the Pacific Northwest. I've been here for about 15 years. Got hired to come here right out of Ohio State. And yeah, love it. Love my job, love the people, love the university. And especially just that we have a slogan that's big skies, bigger ideas, and they definitely live by that. And I've received a lot of support and encouragement for what I do, sort of pushing at the boundaries of knowledge and theory as it relates to this UAP question and other psi phenomenon, but mostly focusing on this.
Sure, of course. And look, I'm sure the follow-up question typically right now would be, well, so what brought you to make this paper? And I do want to get to that, but I feel there's a longer thread to pull there. So I want to put that on the back burner and get back to that later. But specifically this paper, like I mentioned perfectly before, listen to me.
I thought you said it very well. It was very well said.
I'm clearly aware of that myself.
Perfect.
That I said it so perfectly. Yeah. Magnifique.
It rolled off the tongue.
It was beautiful, Patrick. Jesus Christ. My wife would be hitting me upside the head right now. Like,
that's a Freudian slip, my friend. Embrace it.
Listen, it's up here. I don't know. I don't know what happens. It just comes out. Anyway, the paper, it's very thoughtful and insightful, like, because as I'm looking through, like, not only does it, you have y'all's hypothesis and your conclusion, whatever, but what I found interesting after the conclusion was this bit about comparing y'all's hypothesis to other people's, right? So you brought up, for example, Carl Nell, right? And how it was kind of similar, but different. That, how do you explain those differences?
Yeah, it's a great question, and important to point out that this definitely is not our hypothesis. It's been around for a while. I guess Mactoni's is probably the best origination point for the term. And a lot of the ideas, of course. His book, The Cryptoterrestrials, laid this out. It was published posthumously after his untimely death. John Keel wrote a lot about this. Honestly, what I advocate for, the extraterrestrial model, as I was reading Mactoni's book last year, I was like, we're saying the same thing. Like, it was eerie how similar our writing style was too. I was reading through this, just circling, underlining everything. Like, these are arguments I've made too. I just added this time component, that they might be coming back through time. And that's a part of what we added in this model too, is we came up with 4 somewhat holistic descriptions of what they could be, how they might be an advanced civilization sequestering themselves in Earth's environs. So yeah, it's not our idea. We just sort of try to take it and expand it beyond Keel and Tony's, and try to add more of a broad-based framework where we can start to sort of have a grounded conversation about theory that moves beyond, are UFOs real? And that's been one of the most important aspects of the media side of this. It's allowed me to have that conversation with so many more people than I probably could have otherwise, partly because of the clickbait headlines and whatnot, as we talked about earlier. But a lot of people probably had your experience where they got into the paper, and it has been read. I think we broke ResearchGate. A lot of your listeners might not be familiar with that platform, but it's the main one we use as academics for tracking our publications, citations. If someone cites us, we get an alert. Usually, there's a score, an aggregate score based on citations, reads with them, ResearchGate and whatnot. And we had close to 100,000 reads on this paper in about 3 days internationally, because you can see who's reading it and from where. We had to pull it off to make some corrections, but it's still back up above 30,000 reads, which is unheard of for this platform. It's likely the only time this has ever happened, to be honest. But it's good because people are reading the paper. They're not just seeing, the story, which, as this has gone on, it's been funny to watch the sort of the game of telephone we play as kids, where in some of these later articles, they have the completely wrong author, and they have the wrong institutional names for a lot of things. They'll leave really important parts out. Just it's been really interesting to watch the de-evolution of this across some mainstream media platforms. But that's to be expected, and it's fine. But one of the best things we've been able to do is have this conversation. You know, like I did an interview just an hour or so ago out of Toledo. It's syndicated in London and some other places where they cued us in with the X-Files music, of course, but then sort of did a little homework and talked about some valid cases that sort of set the stage for an informed conversation. And it was a really grounded, informed conversation. I've been doing a lot of these 7 to 8 minute radio shows, and people are taking it seriously. And that is a really welcomed response. I didn't really expect that. I figured I'd get the same amount of hate mail I've been getting over the last 5 years. I haven't had any. I haven't had one hate mail email. I get a lot of written letters too from elders in the world, which is super fun to read those. But the response has been amazing, and it's allowed us to have a grounded, informed, open-minded conversation with people who are interested. People are taking this seriously. It started with Leslie Kane, Ralph Blumenthal, Helene Cooper with the 2017 article. A lot of what the Pentagon has done in validating the cockpit videos. Obviously, with Grush coming out, you have the AA-TIP program, Lou Elizondo. So there's just there's line of events that have sort of brought more attention to this in a way that people can understand this is real. And then what we're trying to do with this paper is say, yeah, we did that. Now let's move on and talk about some of the theoretical components to it. It's published in Philosophy and Cosmology for a reason. This is a theoretical paper bringing together different ideas so that we can start to talk about these in a way that sort of transcends or supersedes or is built on top of these basic questions of, are UFOs real? And it's great to see that happening, and I think that's going to continue.